Well, we're about a week in as Free Agent Frenzy has started for 2020 in the NHL. Well, in this video, I'm going to look at all the teams, all 31 teams, at the free agents that he have signed so far. I've already made a couple of videos from a Calgary Flames fan point of view about what they've done so far, and I felt that the Calgary Flames also did sign one of the biggest fish in the market. But all the biggest fish in the market up to this point have been signed, and we'll take a look at a few players that could still be available in this video. So anyway, if you want to follow along with this Calgary sports fan's journey, home the Flames, Hitmen, Roughnecks, and Stampeders, just make sure you hit like, subscribe. I mostly talk about Calgary sports on my YouTube channel, but I just figure in this video we'll take a look at all the free agents that have been signed and debate on some of the deals that have been signed. And as always, there might be a few surprises, and I would say there's one signing in particular that was a huge surprise that not many pundits have picked. I also do personal vlogs, attempt to comedy, and I also do share my experiences I'm on the road. We're at a sporting event, so if it all sounds like it'd be interesting to watch, do follow along with this Calgary sports fans journey. You know what you need to do, just make sure you hit like, subscribe. I also have my other social media links down in the description below. So I'm going to pull up my notes here, and I've mostly highlighted like the most notable names for all teams. I mean, I'm not going to go over everyone's, AHL depth signing, unless you follow that team closely. That's the only fan base that would know these players. Well, let's just start in alphabetical order, all the way from Anaheim to Winnipeg, on notable free agents that they have signed so far as of this recording. So if you look at the Anaheim Ducks, well, the first big name that they signed is they signed defenseman Kevin Shattenkirk, who recently was on the Tampa Bay Lightning and was all part of their Stanley Cup team. But I know that a few years ago he signed a huge deal, I believe, with the New York Rangers that eventually were bought out. But surprisingly, he got 3 years at $11.7 million, so we'll see how that will work out. And then actually, Anaheim also signed former Flame Derek Grant, who suddenly has now become a regular NHLer. He signed a 3-year deal with $4.5 million contract with the Anaheim Ducks. So those are the two biggest signings that I found was notable for the Anaheim Ducks. So now when you go to the Arizona Coyotes, they were also making a lot of news. And I did make a couple videos on speculating on should the Flames make a play for Oliver Ekman Larsson or Darcy Kemper, but both of those players are still with the Arizona Coyotes, and I know they're looking at shedding salary, but I'm going to say it might be less likely that they're going to get traded now, given what's been going on and the fact that Oliver Ekman Larsson only wanted to go to a couple teams, and I'd say he showed more desire to want to stay. But the Coyotes made a couple, cheaper free agent signs. They signed a couple forwards here. They've signed forward Tyler Pitlick to a 2-year deal at $3.5 million contract, as well as Johan Larsson at a 2-year deal at $2.8 million. So I'm not expecting Arizona to make any big names, and they weren't able to sign Taylor Hall, and we'll get to him shortly on where he's going, and no one, I think, anticipated where he is going, but that's where Arizona did. Boston, well, they only signed one notable name as they lost another that we'll get to. They signed forward Craig Smith, who was with the Nashville Predators, as he signed a 3-year deal worth $9.3 million. I know he's a regular 20-goal scorer that he's proven. So the Boston Bruins have added Craig Smith. That's the only big notable signing that I have for the Boston Bruins. Now, this is where things get interesting as we get to the Buffalo Sabres, as they first signed Cody Eakin. He's been a role player that's been around in the NHL. I know mostly he was recently with the Vegas Golden Knights, but he signed a 2-year deal worth $4.9 million. And they also added defenseman Brandon Montour for a 1-year deal at $3.85 million. However, Buffalo was one of the team that won the Taylor Hall sweepstakes, as he signed a 1-year deal worth $8 million. So Buffalo definitely did spend a lot of money in Free Agent Frenzy, as Buffalo has not made it to the playoffs in 10 years, but it's certainly surprising that Taylor Hall, he ultimately picked the Buffalo Sabres, as there was many rumors that he could have potentially signed a big money long-term deal with the New Jersey Devils, and then ultimately the New Jersey Devils traded him to Arizona, and Arizona might have also was trying to find a way to sign, despite the fact they're looking at recouping draft picks and shedding salary. But there was also rumors that Taylor Hall was looking for maybe a short-term deal, and there's a lot of some shorter-term deals that's gone around in free agent frenzy. But there's been a couple big name signings that they could have potentially maybe still signed for more money if the pandemic didn't happen in the pause. But there was some speculation that he wanted to sign a short-term deal with less money for a chance to win. But here, in the case, he signed a short-term deal and got paid. But Buffalo, maybe Jack Eichel convinced him to come to their side, and it'd be a fit in Buffalo and would help out their team and maybe get into the playoffs. But in terms of chasing, a Stanley Cup, I don't think Buffalo at this stage would be considered a contender. But you never know. This was surprising, as I would say. It's still a short-term deal. He'll be back on the market next year potentially, or if things work out, maybe he'll sign a longer-term deal with the Buffalo Sabres. So that was one of the biggest fish on the free agent market. Ultimately went to Buffalo, and not many saw that coming. And then, of course, the Calgary Flames. Well, I think the Calgary Flames did sign the biggest fish in the market when it comes to goalie, as they signed Jacob Markstrom to a 6-year deal worth $36 million. I a separate video talking about that more in depth, where I felt the Calgary Flames, got their top goalie that they've been seeking since Mika Kiprusoff retired 7 years ago. And they also signed defenseman Chris Tanev, both former Canucks, as Chris Tanev signed a 4-year deal worth $18 million. So I made a couple of those videos talking more of that in depth as well. So that's what my Calgary Flames did. So now if you get to the Carolina Hurricanes, well, they signed forward Jesper Fast to a 3-year deal at $6 million. I know it's most recently with the New York Rangers, but I think that's the biggest signing that the Carolina Hurricanes have made up to date. I know there hasn't been anyone else that's worth noting, and there could have been another team that could be looking for a available goalie, but there has been a goalie carousel as we get later down in the list. Now with the Chicago Blackhawks, they made a couple smaller signs. Chicago is still tied up with $26 million with Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, and Duncan Keith, but they also have decided to move on from Corey Crawford, and I know there was some core that was a little upset that the Chicago Blackhawks are going for a rebuild. They've been this team in a flux here the last couple of years. I know they've aged from their 3 cups in 6 years, but they're still tied up with those 3 players, as I mentioned, which, it's a good chunk of your salary cap, which is $81.5 million under a flat cap. But the Chicago Blackhawks, well, I consider this still a big signing, but it's more of a re-signing, is that they re-signed forward Dominik Kubalik to a 2-year contract worth $7.4 million. And then they've also added Mattias Janmark for a 1-year deal at $2.25 million. And for Lucas Wallmark for a 1-year deal worth $950,000. So, those are the only players that the Chicago Blackhawks could potentially go after to try to continue to retool, but until they trade away, let's say, a Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, or Duncan Keith, they're kind of still staying the course and trying to stay competitive, but the full rebuild would be to find someone who could take those contracts off, which is a lot tougher right now at best of times. So now when it comes to Colorado Avalanche, well, the only big sign that they made in Colorado was one of those teams that was rumored to go after Taylor Hall, but it would have been more like a 1-year, $4 or $5 million contract to try to maybe chase the Stanley Cup and cash in next year. But they signed defenseman Ryan Graves to a 3-year deal worth $9.5 million. So that's the only major signing I have for the Colorado Avalanche. So now when it comes to the Columbus Blue Jackets, well, the Columbus Blue Jackets, they made a trade with the Montreal Canadiens, where Columbus traded Josh Anderson and they got Max Domi. So before the free agent frenzy began, this is technically considered a re-signing, but still a new asset for the Columbus Blue Jackets that they signed Max Domi to a 2-year deal worth $10.6 million. So Columbus now has Max Domi. And they also signed forward Mikko Koivu from the Minnesota Wild. Minnesota has also been doing a little retool, and long-term Minnesota Wild is now going to the Columbus Blue Jackets. He signed a 1-year deal worth $1.5 million. So those are the notable signs for the Columbus Blue Jackets. So now if you get to the Dallas Stars, well, they definitely kept one of their players as one of the goalies that could potentially be on the move was Anton Khudobin. This is considered a re-signing. He signed a 3-year deal worth $10 million as Anton Khudobin led the Dallas Stars to the Stanley Cup Finals, and then they also signed Radek Faska to a 5-year deal worth $16.25 million. So those are the big signs that I say the Dallas Stars have made. One of it is just keeping their goalies. Now, Detroit Red Wings, they have also starting to do a rebuild, and they actually added a few more players to their roster that trying to reshape the team, and they were last in the league last year. But one of the players that the Detroit Red Wings signed was they moved on from is Jimmy Howard. Well, they replaced Jimmy Howard with goaltender Thomas Greiss. He signed a 2-year deal worth $7.2 million. They also signed defenseman Troy Stecher to a 2-year deal worth $3.4 million, and they have also signed forward Vladimir Namestnikov for a 2-year deal worth $4 million. So Detroit did spend some money. They definitely had some cap space and looking to start, continue on with their rebuild and look to get better this year. Now up the road, the Edmonton Oilers, well, that was one team that was looking at going after Jacob Markstrom, but he decided to come to the Calgary Flames. But the Edmonton Oilers also made a few signs. Well, they picked up Carl Turris, who was recently bought out from the Nashville Predators. He signed a 2-year deal worth $3.3 million, and then one defenseman that could potentially the Flames could have went after that was on the market. Well, the Edmonton Oilers actually signed Tyson Barrie to a 1-year deal worth $3.75 million, and then since the fact that the Edmonton Oilers lost out on the Jacob Markstrom sweepstakes, they circled back and they brought back Mike Smith to a 1-year deal worth $2.5 million as a re-sign. So we'll still get to see Mike Smith, and I wonder, this is a little bit of a joke, would Mike Smith want to fight Jacob Markstrom in the next Battle of Alberta? But this time I would give the height advantage to Jacob Markstrom if that happened. But be interesting to see. But those are the signs, multiple signs that the Edmonton Oilers made. Now, if we look at the Florida Panthers, well, they signed defenseman Radko Gudas for a 3-year deal worth $7.5 million. Well, the Florida Panthers are still looking at with Mike Hoffman and Evgeny Dadonov, who are still available. But that's the only notable sign that the Florida Panthers made. And then when it comes to the Los Angeles Kings, they actually did not sign anyone notable. I don't think they've actually signed anybody in Free Agent Frenzy. The only notable signing that I'd give the Los Angeles Kings is that they signed defenseman Sean Walker to a 4-year deal worth $10.6 million to an extension, and that was just before Free Agent Frenzy begins. So that's the only highlight that I give for the Los Angeles Kings. Now, when it comes to the Minnesota Wild, well, after they traded Devin Dubnyk to the San Jose Sharks, they were looking for a goalie, and actually they signed goalie Cam Talbot away from the Calgary Flames, and he signed a 3-year deal worth $11 million, which I would say could potentially be a bit of an upgrade for the Minnesota Wild, as Devin Dubnyk's play has slowed down a little bit, but they bring in someone who can come in tandem with Alex Stalock, but it was still a lot more term and a little more money that I think the Calgary Flames are willing to spend, but that's the only notable free agent signing that I give for the Minnesota Wild. Now the Montreal Canadiens made some noise. Well, as I already mentioned, when we go back to the Columbus Blue Jackets, where they traded Max Domi to the Columbus Blue Jackets, is one of the players that the Montreal Canadiens got in return was Josh Anderson. Well, just before Free Agent Frenzy, and this can be technically considered an extension, well, the Montreal Canadiens signed Josh Anderson to a 7-year deal worth $38.5 million, and that was the player that they acquired from the Columbus Blue Jackets. And then you could say the other big notable sign that the Montreal Canadiens made is they signed for Tyler Toffoli, who most notably played for the Los Angeles Kings. The Vancouver Canucks picked him up as a rental, and Tyler Toffoli was also part of the Cup teams that the Los Angeles Kings won. Well, that's going to be a huge signing for the Montreal Canadiens, as he signed a 4-year deal worth $17 million. So the Montreal Canadiens have added some offense to their team, and hopefully not rely as much on Carey Price to try to steal them some games. And also the other big offseason news that the Montreal Canadiens made was when they acquired Jake Allen from the St. Louis Blues, where I would say that could, give them a better tandem. And I think Montreal should be a better team this year, especially with those two recent signings up front. Now, if you look at the Nashville Predators, they added a couple more depth forwards as they signed forward Nick Cousins to a 2-year deal worth $3 million and Brad Richardson to a 1-year deal worth $1 million. So that's just more depth forwards that the Nashville Predators have added on. Maybe after buying out Kyle Tours, it was a big contract that wasn't paying off. They were looking to replace that. Now, when it comes to the New Jersey Devils, they were looking to move on from Corey Schneider. Well, they brought in another Corey, as they brought in Corey Crawford. Yeah, the goalie that all played with the Chicago Blackhawks, most of them will be a part of their Stanley Cup wins. Well, Corey Crawford, he signed a 2-year deal worth $7.8 million with the New Jersey Devils. It could be a tandem with Mackenzie Blackwood, but we'll see if Corey Crawford could rebound. I know he had some injuries and started falling out of favor with the Chicago Blackhawks, but now New Jersey has Corey Crawford, and that's one part of the goaltending carousel. And then when it comes to New York Islanders, well, the only one I could highlight the New York Islanders, they didn't spend much money, is that actually they signed Austin Czarnik, the forward that spent a couple seasons with Calgary. He signed a 2-year deal with $1.45 million. That's the only notable signing, because the Islanders haven't done much in free agent frenzy yet. I know they're going to be more worried about on the restricted free agent market, especially when it comes to Matthew Barzal. So I think the Islanders are more focused on that. And then when it comes to New York Rangers, well, they actually picked up defenseman Jack Johnson, who was recently bought out from the Pittsburgh Penguins. He signed a 1-year deal with $1.5 million, and then also can highlight that they did sign the first overall pick in Alexis Lafreniere to the standard entry-level deal, which is a 3-year, $2.2775 million, which that's as much money as you can spend on a draft pick. So that's all I can highlight for the New York Rangers. Now when it comes to the Ottawa Senators, well, Ottawa was looking to move on from Craig Anderson. I'm not too sure if Craig Anderson might continue playing in the NHL altogether, but with the Pittsburgh Penguins looking at maximizing assets and the fact that we got to factor in the Seattle draft, that they traded Matt Murray to the Ottawa Senators. So the Ottawa Senators signed Matt Murray, goalie, to a 4-year, $25 million. That could be considered an extension as they acquired his rights, but that's the biggest name that the Ottawa Senators have acquired. And they also signed forward Logan Shaw to a 2-year deal with $1.45 million. So that's what I know what Ottawa has done in free agent frenzy. Now when it comes to the Philadelphia Flyers, the only biggest name that I can highlight for them is they actually signed defenseman Eric Gustafsson, who spent some time with the Chicago Blackhawks and was with the Flames at the deadline. He's more of a power play specialist defenseman, and seeing how much they signed with the Philadelphia Flyers, that was probably more money that the Flames were going to spend, but he signed a 1-year deal worth $3 million. So be interested to see how he'll fit in with the Philadelphia Flyers, as they're looking like their team on the rise. So now when it comes to the Pittsburgh Penguins, they actually signed a couple forwards here, a couple depth forwards, as they signed Mark Jankowski a 1-year deal worth $700,000, another player that I'm familiar with, as he was with the Calgary Flames, that Calgary did not qualify him, so he became an unrestricted free agent. And they also signed forward Anthony Angelo to a 2-year deal with $1.45 million. So those are the notable signs that I give to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now when it comes to the San Jose Sharks, well, they signed forward Kevin LeBlanc to a 4-year deal worth $18.9 million. I believe it's a re-signing. And they actually also brought back Patrick Marlow to a 1-year deal worth $700,000. And the interesting thing of Patrick Marlow was that depending on how healthy he can stay, and the fact that we don't know yet, as of this recording, when and how many games that the 2020-21 season will be. One thing we can watch for Patrick Marlow is he is 45 games away from going after Gordie Howe's games played in the NHL record. So there is a potential that Patrick Marlow could go after Gordie Howe's record. And the other interesting thing would be, is not sure where the Sharks are, but could Patrick Marlow once again spend most of his time with the San Jose Sharks, as that's where he has played 98% of his career. But could he potentially maybe get traded at the deadline to maybe load up for a team looking for a Stanley Cup run, as he is still looking for a Stanley Cup in his career? I mean, for sure he's a Hall of Famer, but yeah, Patrick Marlow is back, I think, for a 23rd season because he was drafted second overall all the way back in 1997. So now when it comes to the St. Louis Blues, well, I think they signed one of the biggest fish on the market as they pried Torrey Krug, the defenseman from the Boston Bruins. He signed a 7-year deal worth $45.5 million. So Torrey Krug is going to the St. Louis Blues, which when they signed him to that, and that defenseman Alex Pietrangelo was likely not going to come back, and we'll get to him shortly. And then the St. Louis Blues also signed forward Kyle Clifford, who he was also part of the Los Angeles Kings Stanley Cup team, says he signed a 2-year deal with $2 million, but the St. Louis Blues obviously made the headlines when they signed Torrey Krug, who was most recently with the Boston Bruins. And then when it comes to the Tampa Bay Lightning, the only thing I can highlight with them is more of re-signings that they made, as they bring back Patrick Maroon forward on a 2-year deal with $1.8 million. That's a re-sign. Most notably, he was known for being with the Lightning with winning the Stanley Cup, and he was with the Blues that won the Stanley Cup in 2019. And they also brought back defenseman Luke Schenn on a re-signing on a 1-year deal worth $800,000. I mean, the Tampa Bay Lightning don't have too much money to spend at this stage, and I figured that they want to try to keep the team as much as possible that you just won the Stanley Cup with. Well, the Toronto Maple Leafs, they definitely have made a lot of. They were very busy when it comes to in the free agent frenzy market. As I have a lot more notable players at the Toronto Maple Leafs signed. Well, they brought back Jason Spezza to a 1-year deal with $700,000. I call that a re-signing. But then they also signed Wayne Simmons a 1-year deal with $1.5 million. He's from there and wanted to play home, and he was available. And then the big sign that the Toronto Maple Leafs made was defenseman TJ Brodie to a 4-year deal worth $20 million. I obviously familiar with him as a Flames fan. But they also signed defenseman Zach Bogosian to a 1-year deal worth $1 million. And they signed a depth forward Jimmy Vesey to a 1-year deal worth $900,000. And they also recently signed goalie Aaron Dell to a 1-year deal worth $800,000. So the Toronto Maple Leafs were definitely busy trying to find more complementary pieces to the to fill out their roster and to complement their big four players that they spent over $50 million just on 4 forwards, but they need more pieces elsewhere. And also there's some rumors that maybe Toronto's looking at signing Joe Thornton as well. That's as of this recording. And then when it comes to the Vancouver Canucks, well, since the fact that they lost Jacob Markstrom to the Calgary Flames, they actually got on their goal themselves to be a tandem with Thatcher Demko as they signed Braden Holtby, who the Washington Capitals were looking to move on from, as Braden Holtby's play has declined a little, but he had his heyday, obviously, with the Washington Capitals when he won a Vezina and then to the Stanley Cup in 2018, but he signed a 2-year deal worth $8.3 million, so I would say that's kind of a nice replacement for losing Jacob Markstrom, and the fact that they got Thatcher Demko would be someone who can learn from. That's the only big notable sign that I give to the Vancouver Canucks, as they've also lost a few players, and including my Flames picking up a couple players. Now when it comes to the Vegas Golden Knights, well, they also signed one of the biggest fish on the market. First, they signed forward Tomas Nosek to a 1-year deal worth $1.25 million. But that wasn't the headline, as they signed also defenseman Alex Pietrangelo, as he signed a 7-year deal worth $61.6 million. So the Vegas Golden Knights picked one of the biggest fish on the market, and be interesting to see how the Vegas Golden Knights will go, as they definitely have some big name contracts right now on their team, and we're right up against the cap that they actually traded Nate Schmidt to the Vancouver Canucks to be able to make this Alex Pietrangelo trade work. But the only danger I'd give to the Vegas Golden Knights is they're going to be very top heavy, with Mark Stone, and then the fact they're spending $12 million on Marc-Andre Fleury and Robin Lehner in net. And you could also obviously highlight that they re-signed Robin Lehner to a 5-year deal worth $25 million. So Vegas Golden Knights, they definitely are spending big, or almost looking like the New York Rangers of the West back before there was a salary cap. But they got the biggest fish in the market in Alex Pietrangelo. And then when it comes to the Washington Capitals, well, with the New York Rangers buying out Henrik Lundqvist, as weird as this is going to look, but the Washington Capitals now have Henrik Lundqvist. Yeah, Ovi and Lundqvist on the same team. Well, he signed a one-year deal worth $1.5 million to be a tandem with Ilya Samsonov as they moved on with Braden Holtby. And then they also signed defenseman Justin Schultz to a 2-year deal worth $8 million as Justin Schultz. Well, he started his career after he wasn't signed with the Anaheim Ducks. He played with Edmonton and he spent some time with the Pittsburgh Penguins, including picking up a few Stanley Cups. Now he's off to the Washington Capitals, and then they also signed defenseman Trevor Van Riemsdyk to a one-year deal worth $800,000. And now ending off with the Winnipeg Jets before we look at who's still available. Well, the Jets, this is more of a re-signing, but they re-signed defenseman Dylan DeMello to a 4-year deal worth $12 million. And then they also signed some complimentary players in terms of forward Nate Thompson to a 1-year deal worth $750,000, and defenseman that I'm familiar with from the end of the season last season, and defenseman Derek Forbort, who also was a Los Angeles King. He wound up signing a 1-year deal worth $1 million. So that's all the notable signings that I give to all the teams, all 31 teams that I'll put in the description. I'll just mention what deal do you think surprised you the most? I say it was the Taylor Hall signing. What was the biggest signings? I mean, obviously I'd say Jacob Markstrom coming to Calgary. I would say Alex Pietrangelo going to Vegas, as well as Torrey Krug going to the St. Louis Blues, were obviously the biggest signings. But after all the death sales, we're just under a week into Free Agent Frenzy. Here's what, between NHL.com and Sportsnet, I gather a list of players who are still available that, as of this recording, have not signed yet. So the best still available defenseman, well, they list Dustin Byfuglien, but we don't know if Dustin Byfuglien's actually going to play again in the NHL or if he has a desire to. If he wants to play again, I think someone could pick him up, but he had that kind of squabble with the Winnipeg Jets last season. But we'll see if Dustin Byfuglien comes back. Well, they also note Cody Eakin, who spent some time in Ontario with Ottawa and Toronto. He is still available. And then here's another quick question mark. Zdeno Chara, will he still get to come back next season? He's said he wants to come back, but is he still effective at, 43 years old? Being, Paul Bunyan of the hockey world? I think likely it's either he's going to come back to Boston or retire. I don't know if anyone else would take a flyer on Zdeno Chara. Well, Travis Hamnick, player most recently played with Calgary, he is still available. I don't think he's going to come back to Calgary, but he's still available. I know someone will eventually take a flyer. And then the last notable defenseman I have is Sami Vatanen. So who are these available defensemen do you think could still catch on? And do you still see Zdeno Chara playing another season in the NHL? Already, Patrick Marlow has signed a contract going back to San Jose, and there's rumors as of this recording that the Toronto Maple Leafs are looking at adding Joe Thornton. So now let's take a look at the forwards that are still available. Well, Edmonton has decided to move on from Andreas Anthony after he got traded from the Detroit Red Wings. Well, someone will definitely pick him up for some speed. Well, you got Derek Brassard. Could he potentially get picked up by someone? And then Evgeny Dadonov, well, surprisingly, he's still available, as he was most recently with the Florida Panthers. And then Anthony Duclair is starting to become a journeyman forward. He's still available. And then you got Mikael Granlund, who spent some time, most notably with Minnesota, Vancouver, and Edmonton. Could he eventually get picked up? And you got Eric Holla, another complimentary forward. Now Mike Hoffman, that's another forward that still surprisingly is still available, but it all comes down to cap and how much they want to sell for. Also, most notably with the Florida Panthers. So who knows? Could Evgeny Dadonov and Mike Hoffman, could they circle back to Florida? And then Ilya Kovalchuk, could he go on as a cheap contract? He definitely has had interest career, showing that he can score, but the fact that he was a thrasher and then he went to the Devils and then eventually decided to go back to Europe and wanted to come back to the NHL. And I know he signed with Los Angeles and they kind of really cut him loose, and then he spent some time in Montreal and Washington. Well, could someone take a flyer at him later in the season as a depth forward that suddenly realized we could use someone? And then there's Matt Martin. Could someone pick him up? Or Corey Perry, who's still fresh off of going to the Stanley Cup Finals with the Dallas Stars. He definitely has some big name experience. I know he's a player to love to hate, but could someone want to add a pest and some grit? You also got Carter Sherry, I believe spent some most time with the Pittsburgh Penguins. You got Carl Soderberg, and then I also mentioned Joe Thornton, which he was the first overall pick back in 1997. Does he still have value? Apparently the Toronto Maple Leafs are looking at him as the rumor goes, but who knows, could he also go back to San Jose? I know that he was all upset that he was not shopped around at the trade deadline to potentially go somewhere to win a Stanley Cup, but be interested to see is Joe Thornton still useful. And then the last forward I got is Colin Wilson. And now it comes to the still available goaltenders, but these are towards the end of the line. Well, Craig Anderson, I mean, he's 39 years old. Could he still have some value to go in as a experienced backup, or who knows how next season's going to go? That some teams are looking at maybe adding a third goaltender as well, in case they have someone to call up in the pinch. Could Craig Anderson be useful for someone? Well, Jimmy Howard, I think he might still be able to, he still has a desire to want to play, and I know he had a rough season in Detroit last season. I could see Jimmy Howard potentially going on a cheap contract as a backup to someone, or a third stringer closer towards whenever camp begins. And then you got Ryan Miller, another experienced goalie that is still available, that maybe the Anaheim Ducks are moving on from him, as he's just been a backup behind John Gibson. And then the last goalie is Corey Schneider, who, he was literally started his career at Vancouver, and then he got traded to New Jersey, and then he had his struggles, but he had a big contract that they bought him out. So he's available. So could any of these goalies eventually get picked up? So I guess I'll ask, and I'll put in the description of those players that are still available. Where do you see them going, or are you surprised that some of them are still available? And would you want your team to pick up any of those players? So yeah, that's all they have going around the league with all the players that have been signed in Free Agent Frenzy and who could still be available, and give you my feelings on some of the more bigger notable names, as I mentioned. So anyway, if you want to follow along with this Calgary sports fan's journey, home of the Flames, Hitmen, Roughnecks, and Stampeders, I mostly do talk Calgary sports on my YouTube channel, but I felt I wanted to make a video looking at the Free Agent Frenzy as a whole going around the league. But I also do personal vlogs, attempt to comedy, and I also do share my experience with them on the road to our S4 event. So if that all sounds like it'd be interesting to watch, do follow along with this Calgary sports fan's journey. You know what you need to do, just make sure you hit like, subscribe. I also have my other social media links down in the description below. So I just gotta say, I guess the other thing I can also ask is, what other contracts do you see that have been signed that might be a team that could regret later? I mean, there were definitely some bigger names that signed their long-term big money deals, but there were definitely a lot more shorter-term deals for sure, knowing that the players are banking on things getting a little better and maybe cashing out later, as we have a flat salary cap the next couple of years, so some teams were in a pinch, or other teams weren't willing to adjust their budgets, and I think some team players also realized that as well. That's why you didn't see as many longer-term deals, and there's also some past lessons. Look at the 2016 Free Agent Frenzy, where there was definitely some bad contracts that teams are still regretting today. So as I say, go Flames go, and I'll see you in the next video.